I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Anton Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers,
Anders
And Aaron?
My last name is the same as my brother's.
and this month we're discussing Justine Triet's Palme d'Or winner and Best Picture nominee, Anatomie d'une Chute, or in English, Anatomy of a Fall.
And here we go.
For any student of film history, the English title, Anatomy of a Fall, should recall a famous Otto Preminger movie from the 1950s starring Jimmy Stewart. Add in a cursory knowledge of the film's genre and story, that this is a legal drama and largely a procedural trial film, and there should be no hesitation. Anatomy of a Fall recalls 1959's Anatomy of a Murder. In an interview with Elsa Kislasi for Variety from May 2023, Justine Triet says that Anatomy of a Fall could even be described as an homage to Preminger's film. While this isn't a remake of that film in any way, both courtroom dramas are methodical procedurals that share an interest in uncovering the layers within human relationships, and in unsettling the certainty of the search for facts and truth, in law and in life. I'll note that Triet also cites as an influence Clouseau's The Truth, which I unfortunately haven't seen. Anatomy of a Fall is about a writer, Sandra Voiter, played by the Best Actress nominee Sandra Hüller, who also stars in The Zone of Interest. Sandra is accused of murdering her partner, Samuel Molesky, played by Samuel Thias, when his body is found dead in the snow below the third-story window of the Alpine chalet they are living in and renovating. Did Samuel fall? Was he murdered? Did Sandra push him out the window? The subsequent trial, which takes up most of the running time, uncovers secrets, deeply personal behavior, and serious conflict between the couple. Through the process of the trial, their adolescent son Daniel, played by Milo Machado Granet, who's blind, finds his perceptions of his parents changed. Both Anatomy of a Fall and Anatomy of a Murder are interested in having the private lives of women held up for judgment by the courtroom, and thus the audience. While both trials are blunt about the facts, Triet approaches this from a more decidedly feminist way, which is unsurprising given the time difference, as well as Triet's work in achieving gender parity in the film industry. The question of how we should judge Sandra is central to the film, and I would suggest perhaps the answer is not exactly how Triet wants us to see it. Triet wrote the screenplay with her life/writing partner, Arthur Harari, which brings in an interesting dimension to the dynamic between Sandra Voiter, the writer, who is accused of killing her partner. I'm thinking in particular of the devastating fight between the couple, full of life regrets, resentment, accusations that is revealed during the trial. It's also curious that Triet has the two main actors use their real first names in the roles, Sandra and Samuel. Then there's the meaning of the title, which indicate the hidden layers of the story. Albert Camus' novel, The Fall, or La Chute, shows us Anglophones that the word chute holds many of the same theological associations as it does in English, the fall of man, etc. To me, the title indicates the obvious question, did he fall? But also asks, did Sandra fall? Did she morally descend in killing Samuel? There's also the steady decline of their marriage, which is laid bare for the courtroom and the audience, as well as Samuel's evident psychological descent into a mess of regret and bitterness. And then there's young Daniel's fall from innocence, as he begins to see his parents as not perfect, non-innocent human actors. As a good example of European films still favoring the ambiguity that scholars such as David Bordwell have noted about the post-war art house, Anatomy of a Fall leaves lots for the audience to chew on, and plenty for us to anatomize and discuss in this episode. Listeners, be forewarned, we're just going to jump into spoiler-heavy discussion right now.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
I just want you to know one thing. I'm not a monster.
I need you to be precise. Tell me everything.
Yes.
I don't know what happened. I think he fell off that third floor. The window's open.
The autopsy report is inconclusive. An accidental fall is going to be hard for us to defend. That's why there's an investigation for a more suspicious death. because you were the only person there. And of course, you're his wife.
Stop. I did not kill him.
That's not the point.
Brothers, I want to start with your short response to my initial questions. Anders, and then Aaron. So 1, were you satisfied with the ambiguous ending of this trial film? And 2, what do you think we're supposed to think about Sandra? Just give me your answer to these questions before we open things up into a general discussion of the film's qualities, achievements, and all the other good stuff.
Yeah, I was satisfied with the ending of the film. I think I would have been disappointed if they came out and said exactly what happened or pretended to a certainty that clearly the facts of the case don't lend them to, right? Only we can't see inside the hearts of the characters, so us, the audience, has to do the same as the jury. And you know, like many of these films, I think one of the appeals is not to the audience as mystery solvers, but rather as the jury itself, right?
Yeah.
Rendering a verdict.
And then what do you think about Sandra?
So I come down, like, I find her actually a very sympathetic character.
Okay.
I think that I definitely have my opinion of what is more likely the truth. And as the film went on, I thought that it really balanced delicate shifts in the way we lean toward the different characters, even if my personal sort of predilection is based on a couple of things in the film is to, you know, us align with her.
Okay.
I do think the film
let's hold you there.
does that.
Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, with the ambiguity question, I wasn't expecting a resolution. I think that it would be actually kind of a cop-out if the movie spent all this time digging into the unknowability and then it's like, oh, it's one or the other. Like, that would just be an undoing of the whole film. Not in the sense of what we're supposed to have as our kind of takeaways, because I actually think the movie is less ambiguous in terms of its themes or its approach to who is telling the truth at what moment. I think it's actually like using cinematic stuff to kind of clue you into what you should think in those moments. But as to the actual murder, I wasn't expecting an answer there. So I'm not disappointed by the fact that the movie doesn't resolve it. As for Sandra, she's like an infuriating character, but she's very human. So she's like always interesting at every moment. And because she's the only one who can defend herself in a sense in her own choices, the deck is almost stacked against her where it's like everybody's speaking on Samuel's behalf. Yeah, she's the only one who speaks on her own behalf. Yep. And so it makes you automatically kind of be like, hey, everybody just needs to back off, which you get with the prosecutor and other things. So not necessarily a character I would want to know in real life, but a very person in a movie.
Yeah. Okay. So
sure you don't know that people like it?
Well,
that's the reason why I don't want to know more.
I would also agree that going into a movie like this, partly because it's, this European film, that I expected to have an ambiguous ending, to not come down on certainty. And then clearly as the film develops with the themes being kind of uncertainty, that you have to have that sort of an ending for the film to work. Sandra, I'm probably leaning towards, I find her interesting. I think she's a well-written character. I don't find her entirely sympathetic, and I'm not sure. I think the film is meant to sort of also play upon our sympathies at different points more than others as part of this. I don't want to say it's not necessarily a cat and mouse, but where we as the audience are pulled in different directions at different times, and I think that's part of the way the ambiguity works. That we feel like at different points we're leaning towards a little bit more certainty of something, and then we'll sort of shift in a different direction. But do you think, like, for a North American audience, does a film like this not surprise, partly because we just expect it to be ambiguous?
I don't know. I just think that that's like baked into the appeal of a film like this, right?
Yeah.
Like as opposed to a million, crime of the week television shows that populate the airwaves, whether it's Law and Order or, any of that kind of stuff.
So the people who are going to seek out and watch this movie are not going to be like, oh, like this is a mystery and I'm expecting a solution at the end.
Like and that's not to say there can't be art, and like the mystery is a different kind of film than the courtroom.
For sure. Yeah.
Drama in this way. Like I think the minutia of like the court is part of the appeal. Like the way that human beings, like a court is a really interesting thing, and it makes a really nice cinematic device because of movies' ability to portray different subjectivities and points of view, right? Like literally, sometimes literally, but also, through editing and juxtaposition and things like that. I mean, so I think, there's a reason that like these kind of stories that deal with like the ambiguity of a particular telling, whether it's things even like Rashomon or Last Duel and things like that, I think that are explicitly showing different subjectivities. This film remains, I think, within the more objective subjectivity mostly. I think there's potentially a couple shots in the film that blur that line significantly. But for the most part, it shows the way that you don't, even without like the explicit cinematic point of view shots, we're all attempting to sort a whole bunch of Rashomon stories all the time.
Yeah. I think you're right in that, like, that's the reason why there are so many movies about trials is because it's such a good vehicle for setting up narratives where people have to tell their version of a story, and you set that alongside someone else's version of a story. This film avoids one of the common devices of showing lots of flashbacks.
Yeah.
In some sense, the audio recording that is revealed later in the film of an intense conversation, conflict, fight between the couple functions as like an audio flashback.
Yeah. But then we're given also the visuals to accompany it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it's
everybody else in the courtroom would only be hearing that.
Yeah.
But
it's explained diegetically then, right? But
yeah, exactly. I do want to come back and talk about that scene. I think it's one of the 2 or 3 most important scenes in the entire film.
For sure.
But I want to hear Aaron.
Like, did you go into this movie expecting anything other than sort of a cryptic, ambiguous ending? And is this just also reveal our assumptions about what is, European art film as a North American?
Yeah, so I think the movie's a lot more conventional than it might be praised as in terms of the criticism. It fits in the courtroom drama genre really well. Like if you're comparing it against a Anatomy of a Murder, it has a lot of the same similar elements to it, but also just as a Euro film, as a prestige film in a way that we may have thought more of it in the 80s and 90s, where it's all about like people. It's a prestige film about like the interesting interior lives of people in their everyday, right? But it's like with great actors, and it's kind of a prestige setting. And
trials give people an opportunity to show off their rrhetorical flourishes, because it's literally
the characters and the actors.
The actors,
yeah. But then it's also things like, the movie it's ambiguous in its withholding of certain key information from the audience, but it's not ambiguous in its filmmaking. And that's the thing. There's so many times in this movie where it's playing its hand, and it's not a bad thing. It's just, it's like following the genre where it's going to clue you in that something bad's going to happen, or it's got a lot of imagery of.
Is there a key example you're like thinking of?
Well, my wife was watched this with me, and she was pointing this out we were talking about it afterwards, and she's pointing out again today of like how many times in the movie is a character seem about to fall down the stairs or almost trip on something, or like.
But I think. Okay, I actually think that there's a purpose to that, though. Right?
No, of course there is. But
I think the criticism of the film that you're saying is that it's heavy-handed with its.
No, it's not even a criticism. It's just it's embodying itself more than.
Yeah.
This is not a comment.
Like, this is not a subtle film.
It's not a particularly subtle film. It's not a subtle film because of the central scene that the argument scene is not subtle in any way. It's characters literally dissecting each other. Courtroom dramas aren't subtle because the characters have to explicate motivation at every moment. And the movie is not subtle either because the filmmaking is very careful to make sure that, because it's not going to clue you into some narrative aspects, it wants to make sure you understand each emotional moment in the film through the filmmaking. So it will be like, it will change its tactic visually depending on what it wants out of it. So that's why it switches through like the different mediated lenses, but it's always very clear which point of view we're going through and how we're supposed to interpret that at every moment. And it actually is doing it a couple steps ahead sometimes, to the point where I was annoying my wife by being like, this is going to happen. And she's like, how do you know that? I'm like, because that shot told you that next thing is going to happen. Like,
so what I think this film does is that it where it diverges from other more ambiguous European art films, like say like Michael Haneke or something like that,
or Zone of Interest,
or Zone of Interest, yes.
Yeah, the other
is that
Sandra Hüller film.
Oh, that maybe we can have a big conversation at the end.
Well, I haven't seen it yet.
The just on the visuals, the film is not like foregrounding like some of it's meant to be a very like invisible like editing, continuity editing, and like very clear on all those things, so that it can tilt a little more into some of the thematic or narrative ambiguities.
Okay, so I think what we've arrived at as a conclusion in terms of genre on this film is that we should think of this more as a prestige film and less as an art house film.
Yeah.
And then that's probably like, I know like that's the actual reception in France. Like, I think this was significant as being a Palme d'Or winner, but it was like the first Palme d'Or winner to have over a million admissions to movies, right? In France, they measure box office success by how many people go to the movie, which is a great idea.
Interesting.
But like, so like it's a successful Palme d'Or winner for drawing in audiences. But it's funny because we still have this like reception in North America where anytime there's sort of like a big French film, we kind of assume it's going to be like this artsy movie.
Well, that kind of goes with most of the films that like recently, now that they've started often including like foreign films in the
now that the Oscars
nominees,
want to be a global award and not like a Hollywood award.
Nobody went into, I mean, I think comparing this to something like Drive My Car, I think that film is much more subtle and like challenging in some ways than this one. But yeah, I think American audiences are funny that way.
Here's my thought then. So if we're going to say that this isn't a traditional art house film, but this is more of a prestige filmmaking that wants to draw on ambiguity to make thematic points, then I actually think there's an interesting comparison to the films of Nolan. And in particular, at the end of the movie, what I was actually struck by was that I think it sets up a similar scenario for the audience, for the viewer, as at the end of Inception, where the end of Inception says that, you know what, you're going to have to choose what you want to believe. You're going to have to choose your reality in this, does the top keep spinning or does it not?
Doesn't matter.
And there's even, that is actually made explicit, that theme is made explicit through the conversation between sort of the bizarre court nanny. And we can get into I'm just baffled by the French legal system, but we're going to send someone into your home to guard the child for the witness, but okay, whatever. But so that we have this,
his
like,
mom is going to influence him, don't you know?
The nanny and then the boy have the conversation. And he's like, well, I don't know which way to go. And then she's like, well, you'll just have to choose. And there's this idea that belief is actually a choice. And I feel like, that's how I always sort of have read the ending of Inception to some degree.
But I don't know that this film is actually being that radically
so how do you read the ending
of reality in that way? Like, I kind of like, so it does come down to the kid's choice, right? But the kid's choice is what world he wants to live with.
Yes.
And he makes the choice knowing that he actually doesn't know. Like, the kid himself doesn't know.
Yeah.
But what he knows he wants is to have his mom.
Yeah, and his dad's gone.
And his dad's dead.
So he's not going to have.
So what's the point?
It's the better story in that sense for him.
It's not only the better story, it's like he's choosing his fate.
Yeah.
Like he's not an idiot. Like,
so
it's very actually pragmatic in that way.
Then this gets into,
which I think is the Nolan thing fits really well.
Yeah. Well, should we just dive into then? This gets at like what you actually think, the ending of the movie is saying, and maybe you sort of disagree. Aaron, like, with what I'm putting forward. Because I see this as kind of a movie that sets up that there's uncertainty in the world, a certain truth we won't be able to arrive at, so it actually becomes like a choice.
But like absolutely, like think about it. Why?
But of course, that's true.
No, but why does the movie make so much of the central question in the film is like, how do you react to your circumstances? And Samuel and Sandra are just literally the flips of like the accident to Daniel. One reacts horribly and one is like pragmatic. I'm just going to deal with it. And part of the pragmatism is she might neglect somewhat the actual needs of the other and push it onto other people, which is a very human thing.
She can come across as judgy and like all that stuff, but she's
ruthless.
Actually, I personally also though think she's right in the way that she deals with that stuff. And I think maybe before we get to the ending, or after we get to the ending, we can go back and talk about that the fight between them, the recording.
Yeah,
because I think it's very telling. It influences how you see the ending too.
Oh, for sure. No, we should talk about the ending. Or the fight, because I think it's like the central scene of the film. It's the most notable scene. It's the film, the scene that kind of sums up the whole movie. Aside from some of the things that Daniel says, which really do hit the themes, which is why I'm talking about this movie's not an art house film, because it's not interested in letting you just like completely make up your own mind in each moment. It wants to guide you in the moment, but it wants to let you make the big decision at the end.
Yeah. One early example of how heavy-handed the film is, like the final scene before the credits is literally the morgue anatomy, right? Like by autopsy of Samuel. And the final line that the coroner says is the goal of, I'm paraphrasing, but the goal of a autopsy is to ascertain the truth. Right? Like, and then we cut to Anatomy of a Fall. Like literally the anatomizing of the body is meant to reveal certain truths. But
you're only reading signs on the body.
But you're still reading signs. Exactly. Like the movie's already like laid all its cards on the table. Then it's exactly not subtle at all. Even if it might, for many people today, be actually challenging, philosophically or something. But I think actually says more about people today than the movie.
For sure.
It's challenging. Go on.
No, I said the thing I kind of just want to bring up briefly about the end, and I don't want to linger too long on it because it's not an original thing, but I also think that like the ambiguity over Daniel's story that clinches the trial for his mother.
Yep.
I don't think that scene's nearly as ambiguous as like you think it is. And I have to give the hat tip to Adam Kempenaar from Film Spotting. This is his big take, but it's basically comparing the way that the recording scene and the flashback is filmed, comparing to how the conversation with Samuel driving him back from the vet, and the fact that we don't hear Samuel, we hear Daniel's voice, and it's like a lip sync. And it's like the idea that like this is truly it's a fabrication of a story, because he tells the story to his nanny, the nanny person, at night, and she's not like entirely convinced by his story about like, oh, the dog was dying and it was this and that, and so he has to one up the scale, the stakes of the story, and so he has this story about the drive home from the vet, but then it's like, yeah, of course Samuel didn't say any of that. It's way too neat. It's summing up all the things that Sandra said, so it's like, it's Sandra who drove him home.
So in a way, it's also Sandra who acquits herself.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like he's essentially remembering what his mom said and putting it on in his dad's mouth and using that to sum up the trial. And the cinematic choices that Triet makes are very clear there. Like, you're not supposed to trust that that's the reality. You're supposed to trust that that's Daniel's story he's chosen.
Because he's his voice. We
Exactly.
never
never actually hear Samuel's voice.
We see him, but it's Daniel speaking.
And it's in that dreamy, hazy kind of shot.
Yeah, and then it's just one of those things, if you actually think about the logic of it, it also works, where it's like, why would Samuel say any of this stuff the week he tried to commit suicide, when apparently he was moody and didn't want to talk about anything, and like he was in a horrible way that week and like hungover and stuff? It's like he wouldn't be the one driving the dog to the vet; it'd be her.
He's not going to confide either in the kid.
You know what's interesting about
based
that
on the way
scene,
he
though,
approaches the kid and the protection, like.
It's an interesting scene because it also has like almost like a meta criticism of how flashbacks are often used. Because a scene like that where we wouldn't get the signals that the one character is actually potentially fabricating, but it's clearly their telling of what happened here. Like if you did that in a more straight way where we actually heard Samuel, then essentially what the film is doing is programming you, the viewer, now to believe that this, nicely makes sense for his narrative arc.
Well, what that would do is it would move the level of fabrication from the character to the film itself.
Yes.
And the film is trying to be like the court. The law must be the law for everyone, as the nanny says, right?
So do you think that this is an aspect of the film where it's interested in how films also steer us like the prosecutor?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why does it got the media stuff? Why would
and it goes back
that?
to my whole point of why like courtroom films are so like cinematic in a way that we wouldn't think, right? Because usually one room, limited cast of characters. They're all kind of stagey sometimes, but it's actually in the other stuff, the use of flashbacks, the ability to manipulate time and chronology that makes cinema so well suited to the courtroom story.
Yeah. And this is kind of like we've gone 20 minutes or so.
Yeah.
And if it's not clear, like I think this is a very good movie. It's just I don't think it's like an art house film. It's like very well made, very well acted. It's 2.5 hours and I was engrossed the whole time. I was like very invested in it. I thought it was interesting. And even though I wasn't expecting a resolution, I was like, this is entertaining. Like this is just good prestige entertainment.
Okay,
absolutely.
So, Anders, you also quite positive on the film?
Oh, I like the film a lot, actually. Like, I'm trying to decide how high up on my favorite films of last year this is. It's quite high.
So I
think it's
I like this movie, but I don't love it. And I think like Aaron will dispute with me, but like for me, Past Lives is
I haven't seen that one.
Is my preferred choice.
You guys can talk about Past Lives, and Aaron and I can talk about Zone of Interest.
Partly because this movie makes... So one of the things I loved about Past Lives was that it made choices that legitimately surprised me that a film would do. And that even though I admire this film, every choice is the one I expected Justine Triet to make in order to make this.
But that's what's satisfying, because I actually think that people would make a film like this and purposely try to like subvert it or like have it that, actually Sandra is like this like horrible killer and things like that, right?
That gets into another question that we have to pose after. We do have to pose.
Do you think she's guilty or not?
Do you think she did it?
Which I do want to explain my answer to that in a second. But like this film is not surprising, right? It's actually trying to explore like just some of the basic concepts around, having your life put on trial and the way that cinematically, in an entertaining way, you can like share people these perspectives.
Yeah, Anton, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with Past Lives. A movie I think is good. A movie I don't think is great. And
sort of the inverse take.
Basically what it comes... Well, I don't think this movie's great. I just think it's very good. And actually, something we'll get into later, but like the more of these Best Picture noms I watch, the more I'm like, this is a pretty good year. Like,
yeah.
Like I thought American Fiction was like very funny and stuff. And like, I was like, I don't know.
Zone of Interest is like...
No, and Zone of Interest is like harrowing, but like really interesting too. Yeah. No, but the comparison with Past Lives is more of a thing where Past Lives is a movie that like 10 years ago, I probably would have thought is great because all the elements of it are so tastefully done and it's so like emotionally sensitive. And a movie like Anatomy of a Fall, I might have thought was a little bit hammy. And I've come around to being like, I kind of like the fact that this movie's... I like this movie, the fact that it's bold enough to not hedge its bets in its approach to the material, while Past Lives is an example of, I think, being too smart by half, and you have to hedge every bet because you're thinking about the reaction to the film while you're making it. And it's the kind of thing where I'm like, it's always why I'm more bothered by sensitive kind of discussions of what could be in movies, as opposed to just somebody having actual action. I'm much more about action as opposed to the discussion of action in a film, if that makes any sense. But so like this movie, it's just like, it really does remind me of, I don't know, like prestige movies from 80s and 90s where you just let some
there's
big
also
hams
something
into a room and
classical
yell at
about
each
it.
other, and it's fun.
There's something a little bit classical about it too. Like there's a reason she's referencing Anatomy of a Murder. Like, having those, it's longer, it has those like big showy scenes, or like, other classic Oscar type films, The Verdict, 12 Angry Men, like all these kind of movies, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry, but I don't know. You come here, okay, with maybe your opinion, and you tell me who Samuel was and what we were going through. But what you say is just it is just a little part of the whole situation, I mean, sometimes a couple is kind of a chaos, and everybody is lost, no? And sometimes we fight together, and sometimes we fight alone, and sometimes we fight against each other. That happens, and I think it's possible that Samuel needed to see things the way you describe them, but if I'd been seeing a therapist, he could stand here too and say very ugly things about Samuel, but would those things be true?
It's interesting, though, that the lawyer takes on a very different role, though, here. Her defense lawyer, because
Then Jimmy Stewart
Jimmy Stewart's character in Anatomy of a Murder is very... He pretends like he doesn't really know what's going on, but he's actually quite
But it's a different kind of jury,
way.
too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. So
Well,
I don't
how does this jury work? Come on, like I need French listeners. Please tell me what is going on.
Yeah, Anton just has to go on a wiki wormhole and figure out how the French legal system and how prosecutors can be such dicks to the defendant.
Okay, I still
and try to like impose an emotional take on like an action in a way that
this is something actually that I appreciated with the film. Like, I think a lot of films that would want to foreground, say, feminism or contemporary like social mores and things like that, which I'm not saying this film doesn't. I think, ironically, this film, or in an interesting way that repudiates a lot of the way people go about defending those kind of values of justice and things like that, this film actually says that no, certain things are not actually eligible for evidence in terms of like deciding justice. Right? Like, because the prosecutor one of the most telling points, I mean, this is a literary film in the sense that the two main characters are literary. It's a little bit, there's this like upper middle class bourgeois Europeans, right? Like there's a whole bunch of points in the film where I was like, oh, this is so European. This is the totally like even
money troubles.
We're gonna hold talk, but like I said,
chalet in the Alps.
Yeah, like that he's and they live this cosmopolitan global a life, right? Like, but the prosecutor. So he actually brings Sandra's books to the trial and says that I starts reading passages of fictional characters that are, even if they're not taken out of context in the story that he's reading, is basically suggesting that to write or to imagine bad things is evidence of guilt or moral transgression, which I think a lot of people in our society kind of do think.
Yeah, establishes motivation.
And this film says no, you can actually defend like justice and these things, and those things are actually not permissible to be brought on trial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the movie does actually a good job of like, in a not annoying way, showing flaws in the justice system. That isn't sort of like on the nose, like sort of finger wagging, but you just sort of see like you're like, yeah, that doesn't seem fair. That seems weird.
See, that's a thing I like.
And that's
about
because
the movie.
we're aligned with her, though.
Yeah, but that's the thing I like about the movie is that it's quite deliberate in its hitting on themes and stuff, but it doesn't really speechify about what social takeaway we're supposed to have. Mm-hmm. Like it's about how they treat Sandra in a structural sense and a narrative sense, and that's like an implicit takeaway the whole time. But the movie never really has like a person stand up and be like, she's a bisexual woman and you don't understand. No. She is standing up for this and that. Like, that's never addressed in the movie because it actually thinks it's unfair and it's not important.
What makes her a victim is that she ultimately is the only one who can know what actually happened, right? Who knows? She's the only person who knows the truth, whether she says it or not. Literally, that there's just not enough evidence for anyone else actually to decide.
Burden of truth falls on her.
No, but not only that, I mean, it puts her in a really bad position where because she's the motive, she potentially has this motive that emerges because she potentially, is the only plausible suspect because of some other weird inconsistencies. It's like she is like put on the defensive, but we also understand that it's completely possible that it's like if you have enough information, if you have enough data, you can twist a story to make anyone look bad. I mean, like I think one of the things that's really this film forces people to confront is that like to be on trial, is she, at one point Sandra says to her lawyer, he's like, okay, you're gonna have to be like really honest, right? Like you're going to she's like, I'm gonna have to admit things about my life. And he's like, yes, right? Like in order, you have to, like, even if you're
It's
acquitted
the show,
in the end,
it's
and
a
I think
performance. The lawyer,
but on top
will
of that,
indicate.
it's like, if I don't think most people, and I'm not, even if there's nothing particularly morally transgressive, I don't think most people would want to have their life and anatomized and put on trial. There's something actually, I think something a little bit, this is where I think the film actually even might unintentionally have a bit of a spiritual value, right? It essentially is like, imagine your whole life, every like careless word you said, every bitter feeling you held for another person, right, is now evidence against you in judging your life, whether you're valuable or not, which is kind of, from a religious perspective, is what a lot of people believe, is true. And this film says, look, you're never going to be able to win it, because if we actually search through your whole life, we're going to find an immense ledger of just petty cruelties that you've lobbed at everybody. Like, and so that's what I think what's really like gives the film its tension, is not actually even whether or not she's going to be acquitted and all that kind of stuff, but rather that like anxiety that like of recognizing how it's on, even if it looks like it is plausible that she might have killed Samuel, it's just, it doesn't actually tell us anything. It's unfair. It's like inevitable that she was going to look guilty based on everything.
I would even go one step further, and so like I'm increasingly skeptical of like the legal system as constructed in this way. And I'm not one of those people that's like don't take this as an extreme political comment or something like for a listener, but it's more of, I think that the focus on motivation as the determining factor in guilt is absurd, because it just means that if I can argue it better, I win, as opposed to the determining factor, which is, do you have evidence? It can't be
or did you do something?
Yeah, no, or like,
whatever. Who cares what your heart says? Did you hurt them?
No,
did
exactly.
You kill them?
It's like, well, the truth is not sussed out whether somebody feels it very strongly or not. The truth is sussed out by whether it happened or not, and whether and certain things are unknowable. And the movie's interesting because it takes that one step further into life, right? Like, you choose the story you believe is a choice, right? And the movie's very deliberate with that. So it takes the structure of the legal system and almost applies it to life. And that is the way that actually our society treats things. But I'm just like watching the movie, and I think it's partially because I'm watching Rome right now on your recommendation, Anton. And I'm just thinking of like old ancient Greeks or Romans just being like, let's have an intellectual sparring match, and I'm going to determine whether this person, and it's like, it's now goes to a realm of intellect and theory and legality and procedure. And it's like, at one point, is this because this, like, what's the point here? Like, you're never going to determine it if it's just based off emotions. You have no evidence connecting there to it. It's circumstantial at most. You don't have a handprint. You don't have a weapon. You don't have anybody witnessing it. So, like, at the end of the day, it's also one of those strange crimes where I'm not to excuse the death there, but it is one of those things where it's like, this is the only person in the world she would ever kill. You know what I mean? So it's what is the point of this whole thing?
So, actually, that's interesting, because the basis within the legal system is that, right, in classical moral philosophy, it doesn't just matter that the effect or what happens matters, but then also the intention is the other side of how we classically determine the morality of
But I don't think that's
action.
knowable. That's my thing.
But that's also a distinction
that's what
between,
informs,
Anton, your point to the European versus the American.
But that's what informs
philosophically the European like post-structuralist is actually opposed to the idea that you can intuit intention.
But so that's still within how we approach, right? Like the legal
Mm-hmm.
system in the West.
Absolutely.
And that's why there's the emphasis on motivation. But what I find then interesting within this film is that, let's say, even if she didn't kill him, she actually has the motivation to kill him. And then that raises the question of like, how bad is that? And what I mean is,
but then it extends that to all of us.
I know, but what I mean is, you're reading.
We all have motivation.
Well,
to
exactly.
potentially do bad
But
things.
what I mean is, like on sort of like a moral reading of the film, that it's a reverse of what you just said, in the sense of like, it actually is saying that maybe it's like, even if she didn't kill him, we should think seriously about whether we actually have the motivation and the desire to kill people close to us.
It's implicating all of us.
Yeah.
In it. Yeah.
Because So I mean,
that's why you go to church for that, not to court.
Ecclesiastical courts. No,
yeah, I don't know. So like maybe
do we want to
leave it to the?
This leads into what I just want to get at. Like, what do you guys think she did it then? This is the point.
I'm inclined actually to think that she didn't, but that it doesn't matter ultimately, because as you pointed out, she has a motive. But like, I also think that would like, it actually is almost like too neat if she did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think like part of the effect of the film is like, in that, like, if you have enough, stuff to work with, you can find a motive.
Is it the fear of being sucked into a similar situation where you become like a Sandra, in the sense of like, like we've all made mistakes, and then you're all of a sudden just like, because the circumstances are set up, all of a sudden you're like, no, exactly. I know what you mean. And that's what I think is the movie. What I'll give the movie a lot of credit in terms of also ambiguity, not just about sort of choose your ending, but also it's like it alerts us to both sides of those things, right? Our potential guilt in a lot of crimes that are never committed, in the sort of, almost in the Hitchcockian
it's actually
sense,
very
right?
Minority Report-ish too.
Oh, yeah.
And then on the other hand, the fear of like, what happens if I was the innocent who got sucked into this justice system?
So there's two. I actually don't think I'm wrong in suggesting there's a touch of the Minority Report, like moral dilemma, but the other one is the Kafka's and the trial, like the sort of way that a person can be bound up within systems just through the circumstance that there's no escape from. And I think that's actually the other interesting thing, we talking about the end of the film, and Daniel's like story getting her off and off the acquitting her, is that one of the things that's frightening is knowing that you're never going back, though. Even though he chooses his mother, it's like the idea that there's the line, when you win, it's just over. She says, or the lawyer, you kind of expect she's like, you expect some kind of reward. It's like, I feel like I should be happier that I won, right? That I'm not going to jail for murder, and things like that. But it kind of feels empty. And I think she's onto something there, because it's like, you're right, you're still punished, because the impact of the trial on your life, on laying bare everything, is its own kind of punishment. Now you live, it's to use the Kafka terms, it's not actually an acquittal. It's an infinite postponement. You're in a purgatory now, because, even if you're off, even if you're innocent of the murder, now everyone knows all the things that you're not innocent of.
Yeah.
And so the reward is you get your life back, but you don't really get your life back, because the trial has irrevocably changed it, no matter the outcome.
But is it also then, on the flip side, it's like, is it also that she's like, maybe she did it and she's expecting to be like, now I'm free of it, and she can't be free even if she's acquitted,
Either way, she's in a purgatory.
Yeah. So
whether the moral transgression is the actual murder, or the moral transgression is all the other things that are not illegal, but that are still moral transgressions.
I feel like I am torn in terms of whether, I feel like at times watching the movie, I was like, I think she for sure did it. And then other times I was like, no, I don't think she did it. In some ways, I lean towards her having done it, partly because of Daniel's like reaction to the whole thing. And I feel like he has I believe he sort of chooses that because that's like the preferred outcome. And maybe he also thinks that, like, I feel like he saw a different side of his dad where he perhaps slightly understands his mom's motivations. But I feel
or
like
he finds it more plausible that his dad did commit suicide.
but he sees, like, he definitely has a changed attitude towards her. And then there's also the fact that, like, in that recording scene, one thing I find very interesting is when there's, like, again, we don't see the actual sort of, like, physical violence, right? That's part of what we don't get in the visual flashback. But this indication that she was, like, attacking him the day before is all of a sudden, for the audience who's somewhat aligned with her, with Sandra, it's like all of a sudden you're like, wait a second. It's like, is she capable of violence? Like, it's something.
But he actually also hurt her.
Yeah. Well, it raises a whole question of whether, like, there's a potentiality there that we didn't assume, partly because she's just, like, a writer and, like, what we've met of the characters early on. And you're right. It works also for him as well. So, Aaron.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a very clever way to wiggle out of this. No, so here's my actual thought. So I'll answer it twice.
And then we can choose.
No, I'll say that I think if I'm taking this as reality, if I'm taking this as something that happened, I think it's more likely than not that she killed him, because it's the kind of thing that happens in an argument, which she slapped him before, she could push him after. I don't think it happens in the way that, like, the coroner person describes, where it's like leaning over and smash him in the head, like, really deliberately. I think it's more of, like, angry and throw something at his head or something.
An accident that precipitates
not even an accident. I just think, like, it'd be like an outburst of angry violence, right? And similar to the fight the day before, and it's an escalated version of that. It ends way, way worse because of the situation. And when the noise and the anger and the wine, and she's not thinking, and people are impulsive. This movie's all about people making impulsive decisions, not thinking out the consequences of it at all those moments until they have to think about every possible consequence of every word they say, right, in the court. So it's the really dichotomy. But if I'm treating this as, like, reality, right?
Yeah.
My actual answer, though, is that this type of scenario is a convoluted fabrication, in the sense that I don't think a case like this would almost ever happen, ever, in reality. It is actually more like something from Kafka, or something like from Michael Haneke, like Caché, a movie that this has elements of. And it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, who pushed Samuel out the window? And it's like, well, the director did. No, because it's like he has to fall for all of this to happen. It's inevitable, but it's like,
and certain things have to be omitted. Like, it's kind of
but, like, we are never given the facts.
The evidence that we're given.
We're never given enough answers to answer it, ever.
Yeah, it's actually impossible to answer it.
So we don't know.
But what you're saying is that in real life, that would never, like, there would be more evidence almost every time.
Where's the murder weapon?
But I also think it's also, like, you're right.
More.
I think that, it's the kind of thing that is very plausible and very likely that she could have killed him. I think that it's also one of those situations where it's like, in the legal system, you'd be like, but there is no conclusive evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
And and weird things do happen. And coincidences, like someone getting angry at someone, and then they go off in a car and then they accidentally die, and you're like, shoot, I wish my last words to that person weren't this, because and you impugn as a human being because of narrative. This is where it becomes very literary, I think, the film, and it's important that she's a writer and that people are choosing and inserting words in people's things, is that ourselves, like, when we're faced with a tragedy like that, where we are like, I wish I hadn't said that thing to that person before this thing happened, or I wish that this had been different. Well, ultimately, it makes, like, let's say like Samuel got died in a car accident after their fight. She might still feel just as horrible that she had hit him, that she had, like, been angry with him, even if he was, I think, infuriating as an individual in that scene. I think that it's a narrative connection that we make. We impugn a connection between that feeling we had for the person and what happened to them that actually may have no connection at all. But the movie and the story connects it. And we do that in our own lives. We connect this emotion to this action, even if that action didn't really.
That's literally what humans do, right? We make patterns.
Yeah, and that's what film is on the basic level, right? We show you two images and you form the pattern between them. So one thing, here's an idea. Do you think that I was wondering if the scene with Daniel and the dog, in some sense, is a similar microcosm of the larger story? Not in an exact sense, but I was wondering when I was watching it whether he actually intended to come up with this story before he fed the aspirin, or if that was just one of the weird things that like people do. Like, I think he had this sort of the idea of like, what are these pills? Did my dad take these? Maybe I'll
It's a
give them to
weird
the
thing
dog.
even for a
But
kid
I'm
to
not
do,
sure
to be
when
like,
he
I'm trying to recreate
initiated
the
that
conditions
action.
that I found the dog that one day when he ate the
Yeah.
vomit.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, no, like I don't
yeah.
know if I'm not convinced that within the film it's like that Daniel
But what
had that
Daniel's
plan when he
realizing is that what
precipitated
he's
that
able to do,
action.
because he's free in a weird moral space as a kid, one being a kid and also just the whole circumstances, is that he's actually free to experiment and see and test the relationship between the things, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, he is imputing a pattern and a connection between, say, his dad's depression and the dog eating the vomit and then having that reaction, right? Like, again, that's like for the push.
Yeah.
It's like, it's very
Well,
likely that if
I mean,
he
Anders,
did,
Anders, in this
puke up a bunch of pills in the dog
in
ate,
this
that would happen, but it's no guarantee, right? Like,
yeah.
I know.
In this legal system though, apparently
It's
there's lots
insane.
of let's try something out. Like what the bizarre scene of like, let's have you speaking like in the room and we're gonna get you to like go with
I guess
different
that's where I'm
volumes.
less critical of it, is like, I do think it's absurd and I don't think a person should do that, is that I think the American and Canadian systems do well, they limit certain interactions. They also create really artificial and bizarre situations that people under weird
Yeah.
emotional pressures that lead to stupid outcomes as well. So I'm like, I don't know which one's better in some ways.
Okay, have you guys seen Asghar Farhadi's A Separation?
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, I have.
Because this movie reminded me of that in the sense that it's
Absolutely.
a
Yeah,
dissection of a
Separation is like,
marriage.
let's make a whole movie about that central fight.
Exactly. And so maybe we should move on to the fight, but it's just an interesting it's using a whole court case as actually a dissection of like a marriage, and
Yeah.
specifically pitting the husband against the wife and like what's the truth in this situation. It's a different dynamic, obviously, but
You're not a victim. Not at all. Your generosity conceals something dirtier and meaner. You're incapable of facing your ambitions and you resent me for it, but I'm not the one who put you where you are. I've nothing to do with it. You're not sacrificing yourself, as you say. You choose to sit on the sidelines because you're afraid. Because your pride makes your head explode before you can even come up with the little germ of an idea. And now you wake up and you're 40 and you need someone to blame. And you're the one to blame.
that central fight scene is the like it's the showcase for the characters, but it's also like the crux of everything, right?
Can I ask you guys a question? I think the fight settled for me my sympathies and where I felt.
He's
right?
just
in a
so
way that I wasn't
pathetic.
sure. Exactly. I was just like, everything she says is actually right. But she's
I don't know.
also
I guess
cruel.
I'll say I'll come in on Samuel's side to somewhat. I actually think that she's ruthless.
Oh, she is.
She's
unsympathetic
absolutely
to
ruthless.
people.
No one should actually say those things to a person
no.
that they truly
No.
love. But she's not necessarily wrong in also like that, like a lot of the problems that he's putting on her are his issues. Like the one thing I can't get over the fact that he like doesn't understand how big of a sacrifice it is, or how much like you're not the victim if you get to live in your hometown, in a chalet in your country, and that she sacrificed all that other stuff. You don't get to make yourself the victim all the time, right? Like he's constantly feeling put upon. Oh, you took this. Oh, I had to give up this dream. It's like, what are you talking about? You're renovating your family's chalet. You know, she left a good job and like place she liked to be, you know. Like I just, to me, and also like his like wine, it felt, maybe it reveals too much about me and my judginess, but I'm just like, he's just like is whining about like not being able to write and stuff. She's not wrong. She's, you could just do it. Like you're making excuses, and then you're blaming me, and then she's angry and cruel in some of the things, and she obviously has
she plundered.
Yeah, exactly.
She stole his idea.
But it's like, I think that is actually one of the more interesting moral transgressions. But yeah, so to me, it like kind of finalized my like sort of sympathy even like almost even like if she did it, it's like to me it does provide a motive, and the motive though makes it like wrong, not entirely understandable.
So he's someone who can't get past anything, and
No.
she's someone who makes herself free of anything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And so that way in that sense, like that scene reduced my sympathy for her in her whole trial scenario. Because like, oh, you're someone who's like refused to take on any burdens around you on she's like, she's solely focused on herself.
Mm-hmm.
And she only is interested in the other people and to the extent that they conform to her pattern of what she wants to do. And
Well,
she's even upfront.
But that's also
about
what
that.
he says, right? Like,
Yeah, but I mean,
is-
but exactly. But the whole art, all we have to base, right,
exactly
is what this scene is.
And it's interesting of the film's, in some sense, it's tackling of like feminist themes and using her as this kind of avatar to explore a lot of this stuff of kind of like a male dominated system, exposing the secrets of a woman and holding them to moral judgment and things that are not really, pertinent perhaps to the actual facts at hand.
That's why it's important that she's not like a super sympathetic.
Well, but that's
right. Like
but
it would
that's what I
actually
mean.
be too heavy. It'd be actually like kind of trite. It's like, oh, this poor put upon woman. Like it reminds me a little bit in that way of like last year's Tar, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. But that's what I mean.
A little tiny bit, just her character.
No, but that's what I mean is that the movie is smart enough to be like, let's complicate this a bit, and she can also perhaps embody some of the selfishness that is masquerades as feminism in our modern world, where it's like, no, you're not like for women, you're for yourself. And you're excusing the one through the other. And she's probably not a character who would necessarily say that she's doing that. She's actually quite honest once it gets down to it, that she just is selfish, or she thinks she's being pragmatic or realistic or something. Yeah. But the one line where it's her being like, no, I actually don't owe you anything. And it's like, you're married to him. You actually do owe him. Like, what are you talking about? You share a kid. Like there's a fundamental thing there. And
that's why it's so important that the kid is the
absolutely. But can I reduce that scene also though to like a pure narrative emotional function? Is that despite the fact that it actually makes her seem more ruthless and more likely to have killed him, that scene, it makes him so pathetic that my gut reaction is like, you're an absolute loser. I like the winner. Like,
that's kind of what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Is that it like shifts our sympathy enough that you'd be like,
you're like a pathetic bum. Why should I care if you die?
I'm like, I can see why from her pragmatic view that like, I can see why she would be angry enough at you to like fight you, push you.
Oh, it's just, and he embodies a lot of like self-pitying male attributes of like the put upon, oh, I'm sacrificing for everyone. And it's like, you're as self-obsessed as she is, but in a very different manner.
Self-obsessed through like sort of like this, this rebuilding the house as therapy,
burden,
like,
right? The burden,
he holds these burdens and like kind of treasures them.
But I think the thing that you're both overlooking, and that Sandra does, I guess for Samuel, would be that like what he does hold this burden of being like, like his son going blind. And I feel like she's completely unsympathetic to the idea that he would feel terrible about that. Even if that's not like a logical, like I understand that like it doesn't make logical sense to be like, I'm the reason it happened, because if I had picked him up, like, people do that sort of stuff. But I know that doesn't really make sense. But you're like, but that's a very human reaction to the thing.
Totally.
And she shows no sympathy to that.
Remember she says she hates him because she blames him for it. Yeah. Like she's
like,
that.
You're right. She's like, it is your fault. Like at a certain level, right? Like she's like, but isn't the kinder thing though not to like burden him with that in a way? Like
she burdens with him through not ostensibly burden.
Or not
I think
sharing
that's fair
it.
enough. But he could like possibly like begin to. He needs to learn to start forgiving himself.
It's the idea that when you were like, when you owe me nothing, or like, sorry, when she's like, I owe you nothing. But what that does is like, it's the sort of thing where you're like, you actually, by sometimes claiming that no one has any hold on you, it actually like reinforces how much you like have holds on other people and they have holds on you. Like it doesn't, it's a thing within the film, and that the film itself, I think, shows is that she's not the figure that she sets herself up to be.
Oh, definitely.
Throughout the film, right?
I think that's
he wouldn't be either. He wouldn't be either.
But that's something that I go back to saying at the beginning that I like about this movie is that like most of our self-portraits and the way we portray ourselves to others is a carefully constructed fiction of a kind that we don't we do try to shield people from like the worst aspects of our character and the things that we're like less proud of. So, right. And that when if all those things were put on trial, many of us would be like, shoot, I guess I'm guilty.
Yeah. So in some ways, my strongest sympathies go with Daniel, where he's stuck in this.
Oh, absolutely. I feel horrible for the kid. I immediately,
not only this
the
particular
first scene
scenario,
when he found his dad's body, I was like, this is going to be already, forget about the trial. It's already like this kid's that's scarred as a person for life.
Yeah.
Oh, can I also just like a little touch, which the way that like emotional shorthand works in North American movies, I appreciated that this didn't take that, where it's like in the early going in the movie, Daniel is like inconsolable. He's not moody. He's actually just like crying all the time. And it's not the kind of thing in American cinema, and specifically more than cinema TV. It's always like, if a character is traumatized, they're just like shut off from the world and they just turn into like a little like nothing. And so they can get like moody with it, as opposed to a character just like being like
distraught.
Well, yeah, but like it's partially because I think filmmakers are a little hesitant to make an audience member like uncomfortable watching a character just cry. It's a weird connection, but I'm thinking of like in Melancholia in 2010, where it's just like showing the actual depressive episode, and it's like, this isn't like a aesthetic approach to it. It's just like kind of horrifying to witness, and you don't want to be around it. And that's kind of how I felt in the early going with the Daniel, where it's just like it's almost nice to see like it's not about the fact that he's like traumatized. It's like he's missing his dad and he's never going to get him back. And it's really sad.
It is really sad. And I was also really worried about the dog for a second.
Oh, yeah, Snoop. I was like,
no,
don't kill him. He's a good dog.
I still don't know how the dog did that performance. But
yeah, so like it seems like they trained the dog for like months in order to get it to look like it was gonna like die, like in that, which is pretty amazing dog performance.
Should have a
and
dog
then when
Oscar.
We signal, you're gonna hop up. Yeah.
So, okay. Before we wrap up, can I steal like a couple minutes here to spin my ridiculous idea, which movie I think is most influential on this?
Sure. Yeah.
And it's The Shining.
The snow.
No, it goes way further.
And the marriage.
If you were to talk about The Shining on an objective point of view, externally, what is the actual story you would say? It's that a husband who fails to write went into a spiral of depression in a snowy cottage, in which he became a threat to caused the accident that hurt his son, in which he could never get over, and his wife never forgave him for, to the point where she literally had to defend herself against him and end up killing him, which is what happens in The Shining.
It's true.
And this movie points out Stephen King in a line in the trial. They talk about it. And
is
Stephen King a murderer?
Serial killers?
Daniel looks identical to Danny. The haircut, the red sweater. He's called Daniel. Like, people, what are we doing here? This movie is inspired by The Shining. No, it really is. Think about it. It's too deliberate. Like, he's literally a writer who spirals. Have you read any? No, I was looking around. Yeah. But I think it's there. Why is she referencing Stephen King? It's probably
that's a lot of. Yeah, you're right. The Stephen King mention is strange, and
I think also the kid being Danny,
and looking like him.
Yeah, with the haircut.
And there's a line where the person says the godmother of Danny says that. Yes. She's trying to get him into psychic stuff, and she's like,
yeah.
He
and she's
has
like,
extra senses that other people don't have.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
She's the godmother is the old guy.
Okay, now you're making me think that this is just.
I think it's definitely deliberate.
A weird, trial version of The Shining.
Like, what if you took The Shining and as like a real thing where you don't know you can't know there's ghosts, because if you just look at the evidence, there's just a couple that spiral and the husband dies.
Is this what poor Shelley Duvall has to go through after the film?
Yeah, basically. I need to go
defend herself.
Yeah, I need to go further search and see if there's any references.
You
but
smashed this thing that you ran.
I feel like it's way too deliberate.
Have either of you seen Clouseau's The Truth?
No, I've seen other Clouseau.
Which I have. So in the one interview I was reading, she was talking about how I think Brigitte Bardot is in that movie, and she was kind of manipulated or sort of tortured almost by Clouseau with he did sort of things to try to get sort of the performance, but that has sort of an extra textual meaning. And then again, I'm thinking of Shelley Duvall and The Shining, and the sort of the stories about Kubrick, just sort of she hated that movie and hated being in that movie, and she hated doing the multiple takes and all that sort of stuff. So it's just one more potential thread there to pull on.
I'm gonna go online and I'm gonna find that I don't know, David Ehrlich writes an IndieWire thing that comes out a week after this episode comes out, and
damn it.
No, he's not clever enough for that. But no, it's just it's funny sometimes when a movie seems to almost be telling on itself, and you're and then I was searching through all these interviews or reviews, and I was no, I can't find anybody referencing this.
That'd be interesting. It's interesting then that one of the other Oscar nominee that I was gonna mention, Zone of Interest, also starring Sandra Hüller, is also seems very, in many ways, I think Jonathan Glazer is very influenced by Kubrick across his films.
Yeah, I mean, he's the British guy who's pure stylization to get at something much haunting,
and tackling different genres from gangster to melodrama to science fiction and stuff. Yeah.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.